The medical bay of the Zephyrian research vessel hummed with alien technology, but Lieutenant Sarah Chin knew none of it was meant for her. She lay on the cold metal floor, her left leg twisted at an unnatural angle from the shuttle crash that had brought her here 3 days ago. The blue-skinned Zephyrians walked past her makeshift corner, their 4 eyes glowing with amusement as they observed her pitiful condition. "Look how the human suffers," chittered Dr. Vextar, the lead xenobiologist, his translator device making his words sound mechanical and cold. "Their bones break so easily. Such fragile creatures." Sarah gritted her teeth, not from the pain in her leg, but from the constant mockery. The Zephyrians had found her escape pod, drifting near their research station after her patrol ship was destroyed by pirates. Instead of helping, they had decided she made an excellent test subject for their studies on inferior species adaptation to trauma. Commander Thekval, a tall Zephyrian with elaborate silver markings covering his blue skin, approached her corner. His 4 eyes studied her with the same interest one might show a wounded insect. "Human, your distress calls have been quite entertaining. Your species' emotional responses to physical damage are most primitive." "Go to hell," Sarah managed through clenched teeth, trying to shift her position without crying out. The movement sent lightning bolts of agony up her leg, and, despite her best efforts, she couldn't suppress a small gasp. The assembled Zephyrians burst into their version of laughter, a sound like breaking glass mixed with static. "See how it tries to display aggression even in its weakened state," Thekval said to his crew. "Truly fascinating. Most civilized species would have accepted their fate by now." Dr. Vextar pulled out a small device that projected Sarah's vital signs into the air. Heart rate elevated, stress hormones through the roof, yet she still maintains hostility. "Perhaps we should increase the stimulus to see how long this aggressive response lasts." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. She had been trained as a reconnaissance officer in the Terran Defense Force, specializing in survival behind enemy lines. 3 years of grueling training, 2 years of active duty on the frontier, and this was how she was going to die? As entertainment for a bunch of sadistic scientists? "We have tried their primitive medicines," Dr. Vextar continued, gesturing to the empty emergency medical kit they had taken from her pod. "Completely ineffective. Their technology is laughably crude compared to our healing chambers, which we will not waste on such a worthless specimen." Thekval added with what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of a sneer. "Besides, watching a human slowly deteriorate provides valuable research data." The days blurred together in a haze of pain and humiliation. The Zephyrians would bring their students to observe her, discussing her condition as if she were an animal in a zoo. They fed her just enough to keep her alive and conscious, wanting to document every stage of her decline. "Notice how the human's fur falls out when under stress," one young Zephyrian student noted, pointing at Sarah's hair, which had indeed started thinning from the trauma and poor nutrition. "Yes, and observe the skin discoloration around the injury site," his instructor replied. "Their bodies lack the regenerative capabilities of any truly advanced species. They simply are." Sarah had stopped responding to their taunts. She focused instead on staying alive, on gathering information. The Zephyrians were part of a scientific collective that studied primitive species across the galaxy. They had detailed files on dozens of worlds they had strip-mined after determining the local inhabitants were too inferior to deserve protection under galactic law. Her homeworld of Terra was on their list. Through conversations she wasn't supposed to understand, Sarah learned that the Zephyrians planned to recommend Terra for resource extraction once they completed their study of human psychological responses to trauma. They believed humans were too weak and primitive to mount any meaningful resistance to a proper invasion force. On the 7th day, Sarah overheard something that made her blood run cold. Commander Thekval was speaking to Dr. Vextar near her corner, apparently forgetting that humans could understand their language through the translation devices. "The Council of Sciences has approved our recommendation," Thekval was saying. "The human homeworld will be classified as a Category 5 primitive world. Strip mining begins in 6 cycles." "Excellent," Dr. Vextar replied. And our test subject here has provided the perfect evidence of human fragility. A single injury, and she becomes completely helpless. Imagine how their entire species will crumble when faced with our war machines. Sarah's vision went red with rage, but she forced herself to remain still. 6 cycles in Zephyrian time meant roughly 2 months in Earth Standard. Not enough time for a rescue, but maybe enough time to warn someone if she could get word out. That night, while the Zephyrians slept in their communal rest chamber, Sarah began working on her escape. Her leg was badly broken, but she had been a gymnast before joining the military. She knew how to move despite pain, how to use her body's full range of motion even when injured. The first challenge was getting out of the medical bay without triggering the motion sensors. Sarah had observed the Zephyrian cleaning drones for days, noting their patterns. There was a brief window every night when they powered down for maintenance, leaving a gap in the surveillance grid. Using her belt and torn pieces of her uniform, Sarah created a crude splint for her leg. It wouldn't hold up to much stress, but it might let her walk short distances. The pain was excruciating, but she had endured worse during survival training. As she slowly pulled herself upright, fighting waves of nausea, Sarah caught a glimpse of herself in a reflective surface. She barely recognized the gaunt, pale figure staring back. The Zephyrians were right about one thing. She looked like she was dying. Good. Let them think she was helpless. Sarah had noticed that the Zephyrians kept detailed files on all their test subjects in a central computer system. If she could access those files, she might be able to find information about other species they had studied, other worlds they had condemned. More importantly, she might be able to find a way to send a warning to Earth. The corridor outside the medical bay was dimly lit, designed for Zephyrian eyes that were more sensitive to light than human ones. Sarah used this to her advantage, staying in the shadows as she made her way toward the ship's central computer core. Every step was agony, but she pushed forward. The Zephyrians had made one crucial mistake in their assessment of humanity. They saw pain as a weakness, a sign of inferiority. They didn't understand that for humans, pain could be fuel. Sarah reached the computer core just as her makeshift splint began to give way. She collapsed against the access panel, breathing heavily as she fought to stay conscious. The interface was designed for Zephyrian hands, which had 6 fingers instead of 5, but Sarah had watched them use it enough times to understand the basic commands. As she began accessing the files, Sarah discovered something that made her forget all about the pain in her leg. The Zephyrians hadn't just studied humans. They had detailed records on hundreds of species across the galaxy, most of which they had recommended for resource extraction. But there was something else. Hidden deep in the classified files was information about species that had surprised them. Species that had been classified as primitive but had somehow fought back against Zephyrian strip mining operations. Most intriguingly, there were references to something called the Dragon Protocol. Sarah copied everything she could onto a data chip from her emergency kit. But before she could learn more about the Dragon Protocol, she heard footsteps in the corridor. Heavy Zephyrian boots approaching fast. She barely made it back to her corner in the medical bay before Dr. Vextar entered with 2 guards. He looked directly at her, his 4 eyes glowing with suspicion. "The human appears to have moved," he said to the guards. "Her position is different than when I last checked." Sarah lay perfectly still, controlling her breathing to mimic sleep. The data chip was hidden in her boot, the only place the Zephyrians hadn't bothered to search thoroughly. Perhaps she rolled in her sleep, one guard suggested. Humans are known to be restless during their rest cycles. Dr. Vextar approached her slowly. "No, there's something different. Her vital signs are elevated, and there are traces of perspiration that suggest recent exertion." Sarah felt his cold, alien hand touch her forehead. His skin felt like wet rubber, and it took all her willpower not to flinch away. "Run a full scan," he ordered. "I want to know everything this creature has been doing." The next morning brought a new level of torment. The Zephyrians had indeed discovered that Sarah had somehow moved during the night, though though they couldn't figure out how she had managed it with her injuries. Dr. Vextar was convinced she was hiding something. Increase the pain stimulus, he ordered his assistants. I want to see how much stress this human can endure before she breaks completely. They began using sonic torture devices, filling Sarah's cell with sounds pitched to cause maximum discomfort to human ears. The noise was like having needles driven into her brain, but she endured it by focusing on the data chip in her boot and the information she had discovered. The Dragon Protocol. Somewhere in those files was information about how other primitive species had fought back against the Zephyrians. If she could get that information to Earth, maybe humanity would have a chance. But first, she had to survive long enough to send it. Commander Thekval visited her that afternoon, looking pleased with himself. Your suffering has provided us with excellent data, human. We now have a complete psychological profile of your species' responses to trauma. This will make the conquest of your home world much more efficient. Sarah looked up at him with eyes that burned with hatred. You think you know everything about humans. You think we're weak. Thekval laughed, that horrible sound like breaking glass. We don't think it, creature. We know it. You are broken and helpless. Your species will fare no better. Maybe, Sarah said quietly. But there's something you should know about humans. And what is that? Sarah's lips curved in a smile that made several Zephyrians take a step back. We're much better at playing dead than you realize. Before anyone could react, Sarah had pulled a small device from her boot. Not the data chip, but the emergency beacon from her survival kit that she had been slowly modifying while pretending to sleep. In one swift motion, she activated it and threw it directly into the ship's main power coupling. The explosion wasn't large, but it was precisely targeted. Sarah had spent days studying the ship's layout, and she knew exactly where to hit to cause maximum damage. The lights went out, emergency alarms began blaring, and in the confusion that followed, Sarah disappeared. She had one chance to get to the communications array and transmit her warning to Earth. One chance to prove that humans were anything but helpless. The hunt was about to begin. The emergency lighting cast eerie red shadows throughout the Zephyrian vessel as Sarah crawled through the maintenance shafts. Her broken leg screamed in protest with every movement, but the adrenaline coursing through her veins kept her going. Behind her, she could hear the frantic chittering of the alien crew as they tried to restore power to their ship. Find a human. Commander Thekval's voice echoed through the corridors, his usual composure completely shattered. She cannot have gone far with her injuries. Sarah almost smiled despite her pain. The Zephyrians had made the same mistake that had cost them dearly with other species. They had underestimated their prey. The maintenance shafts were designed for their repair drones, not living beings, but Sarah had watched those drones for days and memorized their routes. She reached the first junction and paused to catch her breath. The data chip in her boot contained everything. The locations of worlds the Zephyrians planned to destroy, their military capabilities, and, most importantly, information about the mysterious Dragon Protocol. Whatever that was, it had helped other species fight back against these alien invaders. A vibration in the shaft walls told her that the Zephyrians had activated their search drones. Sarah forced herself to move faster, ignoring the way her makeshift splint dug into her flesh with each crawl forward. The communications array was 3 levels up, and she had to reach it before they restored full power to their security systems. As she climbed through a vertical shaft, using her arms to pull herself up while her broken leg dangled uselessly, Sarah heard Dr. Vextar's voice from nearby. Impossible, he was saying to someone. The human's injuries should have made movement nearly impossible. Her pain levels alone should have kept her unconscious. Perhaps our understanding of human physiology is incomplete, came another voice, one of his assistants. No, Vextar snapped. Humans are primitive. They lack the pain tolerance of any advanced species. There must be another explanation. Sarah reached the communications level just as the power began to flicker back on. She had maybe 5 minutes before the security systems came fully online and detected her presence. The communications array was behind a locked door, but Sarah had prepared for this too. During her days of captivity, she had palmed several small components from the medical equipment when the Zephyrians weren't watching. Combined with parts from her survival gear, she had created a crude but effective electromagnetic pulse device. It would only work once, but it should be enough to override the door locks. The device worked perfectly, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. Sarah dragged herself into the communications chamber and immediately began working on the transmission equipment. The controls were in the Zephyrian language, but the symbols were simple enough to understand. As she worked, uploading the stolen data to a secure Terran military frequency, Sarah's mind wandered to her family back on Earth. Her younger brother Jake, who was just starting his engineering degree. Her parents, who ran a small farm in the agricultural zones. They had no idea that their world was about to be marked for destruction by an alien species that viewed humans as nothing more than inferior insects. The upload was taking too long. Sarah could hear heavy footsteps approaching the communications room. Zephyrian security forces had located her. She frantically tried to speed up the process, but the alien technology was unfamiliar and complex. The door burst open just as the transmission reached 60% completion. There, Commander Thekval strode into the room, flanked by 4 heavily armed guards. The primitive creature thinks it can operate our technology. How amusing. Sarah didn't stop working. Her fingers flew over the controls as the upload crept towards 70%. Not so primitive after all, am I? Thekval's 4 eyes narrowed with rage. Seize her. Carefully. I want to know what she was attempting to transmit. The guards moved forward, but Sarah had one last surprise prepared. Hidden in her other boot was the final component of her survival kit, a flashbang grenade designed for emergency situations. She activated it and threw it directly at the main console. The explosion of light and sound sent the Zephyrians reeling backward, their sensitive eyes and ears overwhelmed by the assault. In the confusion, Sarah managed to hit the emergency broadcast button, sending her incomplete transmission on all available frequencies. 73%. Not everything, but hopefully enough to warn Earth about what was coming. Strong alien hands grabbed her arms and dragged her away from the console. Through her ringing ears, Sarah could hear Thekval screaming orders to his crew. Cut the transmission, lock down all communications, and bring that human to the detention level immediately. The detention level was different from the medical bay where Sarah had been held before. This was clearly designed for prisoners who were considered dangerous. The cell was small, windowless, and constructed from some kind of energy-dampening material that made her feel weak and disoriented. Commander Thekval stood outside her cell, his blue skin flushed with a darker color that Sarah had learned indicated extreme anger in Zephyrians. "You have caused considerable damage to our research schedule," he said, his voice cold and controlled once again. "But more importantly, you have proven that our assessment of human capabilities may have been incomplete." Dr. Vextar appeared beside him, carrying a tablet displaying Sarah's medical readings. Her brain activity shows no signs of the psychological breakdown we expected. Despite severe physical trauma, prolonged torture, and social isolation, she maintains full cognitive function and continues to display aggressive responses. Interesting, Thekval mused. Perhaps humans are not quite as primitive as we initially believed. This changes our research parameters considerably. Sarah pulled herself up to a sitting position, trying to project strength despite feeling like her body was about to collapse. What changes is that you're going to find out humans don't break as easily as you think. On the contrary, Thekval said with what might have been a smile, "You have merely earned yourself a different fate than we originally planned." Dr. Vextar activated his tablet, and a holographic display appeared in the air between them. It showed what looked like a massive space station surrounded by smaller ships. "This is Research Station Omega 7, our primary facility for studying dangerous specimens. We have decided that you warrant further investigation. But first," Thekval continued, We must determine whether your unusual resilience is typical of your species or merely an aberration. To that end, we have decided to implement the Dragon Protocol. Sarah's blood ran cold. She had seen references to the Dragon Protocol in the stolen files, but hadn't had time to learn what it actually meant. "What is that?" "A test," Dr. Vextar said, clearly enjoying her discomfort. "We have a creature aboard this vessel that we captured from the Drakari system. A species that your primitive minds would probably classify as a dragon. It has proven remarkably resistant to our standard research methods." Thekval's 4 eyes gleamed with anticipation. The Dragon Protocol involves introducing 2 aggressive species to each other under control conditions. We observe their interactions, measure their responses to each other, and gather valuable data about their combat capabilities and psychological resilience. "You're going to feed me to a dragon," Sarah said flatly. "Oh no," Dr. Vextar laughed. "We are going to lock you in a chamber with a highly intelligent, extremely dangerous predator that has been starved and tortured for several weeks. What happens after that is entirely up to the 2 of you." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but she forced herself to meet their alien gazes without flinching. "And if I survive, then you will have provided us with unprecedented data about human combat capabilities," Thekval replied. "And we will proceed to the next phase of testing. And if I don't survive, then we will have learned that humans are indeed as weak as we initially believed, and your homeworld will be strip-mined as planned." They left her alone after that, and Sarah spent the next several hours trying to process what she had learned. The transmission had been incomplete, but hopefully whoever received it would understand the threat. The Zephyrians were going to test her against some kind of alien predator, and the survival of her entire species might depend on the outcome. Sarah examined her cell carefully, looking for any possible advantages. The walls were smooth and featureless, designed to prevent escape attempts. The floor was made of the same energy-dampening material, which explained why she felt so weak. There was no obvious way out, but there was something else. In one corner of the cell, partially hidden behind what looked like a waste disposal unit, Sarah found scratches in the wall. They were deliberate, purposeful, marks made by something with very sharp claws. As she traced the scratches with her finger, Sarah realized they formed symbols. Not Zephyrian writing, but something else entirely. Something that looked almost like a warning. The symbols seemed to tell a story. A creature had been held in this cell before her. A creature that had learned to hate the Zephyrians as much as she did. And if Sarah was reading the symbols correctly, that creature was still alive, still fighting, and still looking for a way to escape. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of heavy machinery moving outside her cell. Through the small window in the door, Sarah could see Zephyrian technicians preparing some kind of transport device. It looked like a cage, but one designed to hold something much larger and more dangerous than a human. "Tomorrow," she heard Dior Vextar say to one of his assistants, "we implement the Dragon Protocol at 0800 hours. Make sure both specimens are properly prepared." "What about the human's injuries?" the assistant asked. "Leave them. Natural disadvantages make for better test data." As the Zephyrians moved away, Sarah returned to studying the claw marks on her cell wall. If she was going to face some kind of alien dragon, she needed to understand what she was dealing with. And, more importantly, she needed to figure out if there was any chance of survival. The marks told a story of rage, intelligence, and determination. Whatever creature had made them was not just a mindless beast. It was a thinking being that had been pushed to the breaking point by Zephyrian torture, just like her. Sarah spent the rest of the night preparing herself mentally for what was to come. She had survived broken bones, alien torture, and the psychological trauma of knowing her entire species was doomed. Now she had to survive an encounter with a starved alien predator. But as she traced the claw marks one more time, Sarah began to think that maybe the Zephyrians had made another mistake. They assumed that throwing 2 desperate, tortured creatures together would result in them destroying each other. They didn't understand that sometimes shared suffering creates alliance rather than conflict. When the guards came for her the next morning, Sarah was ready. Her leg was still broken. Her body was weak from days of poor treatment, and she was about to face the most dangerous moment of her life. But she was no longer afraid. She was angry, and as she had learned during her military training, an angry human was often the most dangerous kind of human there was. The arena chamber was a circular room with walls of reinforced transparent aluminum, allowing the Zephyrian researchers to observe while remaining safely outside. Sarah was pushed through a narrow entrance that sealed immediately behind her, trapping her in the center of the space. Her broken leg nearly gave out as she stumbled forward, but she managed to stay upright. The chamber was larger than her cell, maybe 30 meters across, with a high ceiling that disappeared into shadows. Strange marks scarred the walls, long gouges that looked like they had been made by massive claws. The floor was stained with dark patches that Sarah preferred not to think about too carefully. "Magnificent," she heard Dr. Vextar say through speakers mounted in the walls. "The human displays appropriate fear responses. Her heart rate has increased significantly." Commander Thekval's voice joined him. "Begin the second phase. Release the Drakari." A grinding sound echoed through the chamber as a section of the far wall began to rise. Sarah pressed her back against the wall and tried to prepare herself for whatever was about to emerge from that darkness. What came out was not what she had expected. The creature was massive, easily 3 meters tall, and covered in scales that shifted color from deep purple to black, depending on the angle of the light. Its head was long and serpentine, with intelligent golden eyes that fixed on Sarah immediately. 6 limbs moved with fluid grace for legs, and 2 arms that ended in hands with wickedly sharp claws. But it was the creature's condition that shocked Sarah. Like her, it had been tortured and starved. Its scales were dull and cracked, several of its claws were broken, and there were obvious scars from Zephyrian medical procedures. Most telling of all, there was a metal collar around its neck that sparked occasionally with electric current. The dragon, for that was clearly what it was, moved slowly into the arena, its golden eyes never leaving Sarah's face. She could see intelligence there, calculation, and something else that made her heart race. Recognition. The creature had seen the claw marks she had left in her cell. Somehow, it had known she would be brought here. Fascinating, Dr. Vextar's voice crackled through the speakers. The Drakari is not immediately attacking. Perhaps it is assessing the threat level of the human. The human appears to be paralyzed with fear, Thekval added with satisfaction. This should be over quickly. But Sarah wasn't paralyzed with fear. She was thinking. The dragon had stopped about 10 meters away from her, well within striking distance of its long neck and claws, but it wasn't attacking. Instead, it was watching her with those incredibly intelligent eyes. Slowly, carefully, Sarah raised her hand and touched the wall beside her, the same wall where she had found the claw marks in her cell. She traced a simple pattern in the air, the symbol for friend that she had deciphered from the marks. The dragon's head tilted slightly to one side, and its eyes widened. Then, moving with deliberate slowness, it extended one clawed hand and traced the same symbol in the air. What is the human doing? Dr. Vextar sounded confused. Those gestures appear to have some kind of meaning. Primitive communication attempts, Thekval replied dismissively. Humans often try to negotiate when faced with superior predators. It will not help her. But Sarah could see that the dragon understood perfectly. More than understood, it was responding. The creature moved closer, but its posture was not threatening. If anything, it seemed curious about her. Sarah pointed to her broken leg, then to the scars visible on the dragon's body, then to the collar around its neck. The message was clear. They were both prisoners, both victims of Zephyrian cruelty. The dragon's response was to emit a low sound that was part growl, part purr. It moved even closer until Sarah could see her own reflection in its golden eyes. Then, very gently, it extended one clawed finger and touched the makeshift splint on her leg. Impossible, Dr. Vextar's voice had risen to a higher pitch. The Drakari is showing protective behavior toward the human. This should not be happening. Perhaps the creature is playing with its food, Thekval suggested, but he sounded uncertain. Sarah reached out slowly and placed her hand on the dragon's snout. The scales were warm and surprisingly smooth. The creature closed its eyes and leaned in her touch, making that same purring sound. In that moment, Sarah understood something that the Zephyrians could never comprehend. They saw intelligence only in terms of technology and conquest. They couldn't recognize the deeper connection that existed between beings who had suffered together, who had found common ground in their shared pain and determination to survive. The dragon opened its eyes and looked directly at Sarah. Then it did something that made her gasp with surprise. It spoke. The words came out as a series of growls and hisses, but the translation collar around its neck converted them to standard galactic speech. "You are not like the blue ones." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. "No, I'm not. They hurt you too." "Yes." The dragon's eyes blazed with golden fire. "Then we are allies." "What is happening?" Dr. Vextar was practically shrieking through the speakers. The Drakari was not supposed to be able to communicate with the human. "The translation collar," Thekval said grimly. "We forgot that it works both ways." Sarah looked up at the observation windows where she could see the dark shapes of Zephyrians watching. "They expected us to fight each other." "Yes," the dragon rumbled. "They enjoy watching others suffer. They have done this before with other species. Always, the prisoners destroy each other instead of a true enemy. But not this time." The dragon's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing teeth like ivory daggers. "Not this time." Sarah felt a surge of hope for the first time in days. "What's your name?" "I am called Drakthor of the Ember Clan." "And you, small warrior?" "Lieutenant Sarah Chun, Terran Defense Force." "Terran," Drakthor repeated thoughtfully. "I have heard this name in their files. Your world is marked for destruction." Sarah's heart sank. "I managed to send a partial warning, but I don't know if it got through." "Then we must ensure it did," Drakthor said firmly. "But first we must escape this place." "How?" "The walls are reinforced, the door is sealed, and there are probably a dozen guards outside." Drakthor's eyes gleamed with predatory intelligence. "The blue ones made one critical error in their experiment." "What's that?" "They assumed that because we were both injured and weak, we would be helpless." The dragon moved to the center of the arena, directly under the main observation window. They forgot that injured creatures can still be very, very dangerous. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Drakthor reared up on his hind legs and slammed his powerful claws against his collar. The metal sparked and cracked but held. He struck again and again, each blow causing the device to malfunction further. "Stop!" Dr. Vextar's voice was pure panic now. "If the collar fails, we will lose control of the specimen. Activate the neural suppressors." Thekval ordered. "Subdue both subjects immediately." But it was too late. With a final blow, Drakthor shattered his collar completely. The moment the device broke, Sarah felt a change in the air around him. The dragon seemed to grow larger, more powerful, as if the collar had been suppressing more than just his ability to speak. "Now," Drakthor said, his voice free of the mechanical translation effect, "they will learn what it means to face a Drakari without chains." The dragon drew in a deep breath, and Sarah suddenly understood why the Zephyrians had been so afraid of him. When Drakthor exhaled, a stream of bright plasma erupted from his mouth, striking the reinforced wall with devastating force. The transparent aluminum began to melt. "Impossible!" Dr. Vextar screamed. "The plasma suppressors in the collar should have prevented that." "The suppressors have been destroyed," came another voice, one of the technicians. "The creature has full access to its natural abilities." Sarah watched in amazement as Drakthor systematically began melting through the arena walls. The plasma breath was precise and controlled, cutting through the reinforced barriers like they were made of paper. Within minutes, he had created a hole large enough for them to escape through. Can you travel? He asked Sarah, extending a clawed hand to help her up. Sarah grabbed his hand and pulled herself upright, ignoring the pain in her leg. I'll manage. Then we go. The blue ones will not expect us to work together, which gives us an advantage. But it will not last long. As they climbed through the melted hole in the wall, Sarah heard the sounds of chaos throughout the ship. Alarms were blaring, and she could hear Zephyrian voices shouting orders and coordinates. Where are we going? She asked as Drakthor helped her navigate the damaged corridor. First, to retrieve my ship, Drakthor replied. It is held in their main hangar bay. Then, to send a proper warning to your people. The blue ones have underestimated both our species, and they will pay for that mistake. They moved through the ship with surprising speed despite Sarah's injury. Drakthor seemed to know the layout perfectly, and his massive form was intimidating enough that the few Zephyrians they encountered fled rather than trying to stop them. How do you know the ship so well? Sarah asked as they approached the hangar bay. I've been their prisoner for 2 months, Drakthor said grimly. I've had time to study every corridor, every weakness in their security. They thought I was just an animal in a cage, but I was learning. The hangar bay was massive, filled with various alien spacecraft. Drakthor led Sarah directly to a sleek vessel that looked like it was built for both speed and combat. It was clearly of non-Zephyrian design, with flowing lines that reminded Sarah somehow of the dragon himself. My ship, the Star Talon, Drakthor said with obvious pride. The blue ones could not understand its systems, so they kept it intact for study. As they boarded the ship, Sarah felt hope growing stronger in her chest. The interior was designed for a being of Drakthor's size, but there was a secondary station that seemed perfect for a human operator. Your people and mine, Drakthor said as he began powering up the ship's systems. We are not the first to face the blue ones. They have done this across the galaxy, marking species for extinction after proving their weakness. But some species have surprised them. The Dragon Protocol, Sarah said, understanding flooding through her. It wasn't just a test. It was their way of confirming that species were too primitive to work together. Exactly. Drakthor's eyes blazed with satisfaction. But when species prove they can cooperate, can overcome their differences to face a common threat, it changes everything. The Star Talon lifted off just as Zephyrian security forces burst into the hangar bay. Through the viewport, Sarah could see Commander Thekval and Dr. Vextar watching in apparent shock as their prisoners escaped in a ship they thought was disabled. Now, Drakthor said, his claws dancing over the ship's controls, we send a message that will reach not just your people, but every world in this sector. We tell them that the Zephyrians are coming, and that they can be defeated. Sarah took her position at the communication station, her heart racing with excitement. What kind of message? The kind that starts a revolution, Drakthor replied. The kind that shows the galaxy that intelligence is not measured by technology alone, but by the willingness to stand together against those who would destroy us. As the Star Talon jumped to hyperspace, leaving the Zephyrian research vessel far behind, Sarah began composing a message that would change everything. It would tell the galaxy about the Zephyrian threat, about their plans for conquest, and about the proof that supposed primitive species could work together to overcome any challenge. The Zephyrians had wanted to use the Dragon Protocol to prove that cooperation between different species was impossible. Instead, they had created the alliance that would bring about their downfall. And it all began with an injured human girl and a dragon who refused to fight each other when they should have been fighting their captors instead.